Welcome back. It's now time to talk about the expected upgrade of the airports across the country. We understand 21 or 23.1 billion naira is being earmarked. Joining us on the program to make sense of how this will happen and what we should be expecting at airports is the Managing Director of the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria, Olubunmi Kuku. She joins us via Zoom. Ms. Kuku, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good morning, and thank you again for having me.
So let's just maybe a concise way of explaining these funds that is earmarked for this purpose. You know, when Nigerians hear money, it's our commonwealth, they are very curious to know how it's spent. So we understand there will be rehabilitation and all sorts as far as the airports are concerned. Just maybe a short version before we get to the nitty-gritty of what this is all about.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you again. As you know, the aviation sector, especially the airports, are actually quite critical in nature and extremely capital intensive. So when you refer to a number of, 23.1 billion or 23 billion, it actually scratches the surface if you look at where we are in terms of infrastructure development and upgrades. Yes, we do have some money earmarked for capital intensive projects this year, maybe slightly more that you have actually spoken to. But what I do want to say is that the federal government of Nigeria, through the Federal Airport Authority, actually has 22 airports under our domain, which we manage. Majority of those airports require that we actually maintain and upgrade in critical infrastructure, which includes the airport itself, largely the terminal area, the land side, as well as the air side. As you know, a lot of our airports were built, I would say that some of the airports were actually built years back. The average lifespan of, a typical runway is about 20 years. We do have quite a number of them that have exceeded that time. We've been doing some palliative works, and as such, a significant amount of the money that has been earmarked would actually go into full rehabilitation of the runways. We also have a number of our domestic terminals. So by the way, we have the primary airports, which you would largely know as some of our international airports in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano, as well as Enugu. In terms of our secondary airports, we're also looking at terminal infrastructure upgrades. So that includes expansion of fingers, where our passengers are departing from, also improving the passenger experience. I know we've had quite a number of challenges with cooling systems, the HVAC systems, even very simple things like the electricity as well as the plumbing infrastructure. So a lot of the funding will be going into that. Of course, let's not leave out the airside infrastructure. As I mentioned, the runways, upgrading some of the airfield lighting systems as well. There is a plan to go into Cat 3 for some. In other instances, we've sort of looked and we've prioritized to see where we can have Cat 2. But I will spend some time speaking about that much later in the program, largely around where the focus will be. Thank you.
All right, I want to go to one quick issue before my colleagues bring in their questions. That has to do with the people just literally, I don't want to use a bad word, maybe soliciting for money or assaults literally and all of that. Is that part of what you're dealing with as well? Because we understand there may be a task force to ensure that these people always harass people for money at the airport. We stop them because it doesn't say well. Is our gateway, by the way?
Yes. As you know, there are multiple security agencies at the airport, but the aviation security team, which we refer to as AVSEC, which resides as part of FAAN, is actually responsible for overseeing and coordinating all of the security agencies at the airport. Over the last few weeks, we've put a task force together. And by the way, this has been a recurring task force through past administrations. But this time we've been quite lucky to have it championed by the Honorable Minister of Aviation, Mr. Festus Keyamo, as well as the National Security Advisor. Given the fact that the National Security Advisor is responsible for coordinating majority of the security agencies across the country, and given that they are directly under his purview, we have met on several occasions. We have deployed tactics and initiatives to make sure that there's visibility around individuals who are actually supposed to be at the airport, and making sure that when they're not supposed to be on duty, we're sort of managing their activities. In addition, there are measures that have been put in place to make sure that they are identified. So if you are asked or solicited for any funding at the airport, please make sure that if once they wear a name tag, there are channels and avenue for you to actually report those particular individuals. It is indeed a deterrent, given the fact that the airports are a major gateway into the country. Over the next couple of weeks, you will be seeing additional initiatives and measures. Very simple things as QR codes where you can just scan, send messages either to us as FAAN or even to Servicom. I did recall meeting with the Director General of Servicom last week in my office where we hosted her. They also had a couple of avenues where people have come back to sort of share their experiences. We're working tactically, and there are very severe measures in place to make sure that anyone found wanting will definitely be punished and will be leveraged based on the security agencies that they represent. So I think this is also a warning and a call outside of that to the agencies, but also to individuals to please not patronize them for any reason. We've put in measures in place to make sure that we have the right security and screening equipment where possible at most of our terminals, to make sure that the prohibited materials that are being sought through are actually going through the screening machines. The Honorable Minister has also made provision for additional security equipment where necessary so that we can stop some of the manual searches, except the secondary searches that happen just pre-boarding. Again, that is dependent on the country that you're flying into.
Right, so quite a number of issues you have to contend with, really, and I do not envy you right now, and I imagine a lot of Nigerians do not envy you, but I'd like you to speak to something that has been a systemic issue, and I want to posit this with the fact that you're coming from a background, financial services, you worked with Visa, you've worked with some big companies where there's there's the organizational structure, the blueprint, the ethos, and the rest. So transitioning from that, and this is a bit personal as well, transitioning from that to, Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, where there's a lot of work. What have you found to be the major challenge as to why we've not been able to make our, public services look like what we find in the corporate world, in the private world? What is that one major challenge that you maybe have identified?
Thank you. Let me start by correcting the notion. So yes, I have worked in the private sector and I have worked for global organizations where it's probably a lot more seamless. But I do want to say that the initial background working in the public sector, so actually working as a special advisor for one of the former ministers of aviation and also working, again, within one of the agencies in the aviation sector, being the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency, also gave me a prime experience before coming back into the sector. What I would say is that there are definitely experiences that can be leveraged from the private sector, but the public sector indeed is unique. If you look at the structure of FAAN today in comparison to some of our sister agencies, you pretty much start with the dearth of skill sets, the lack of trainings in certain areas or certifications that you've seen over the years, and also a required change in mindset. I want to start by saying that, look, when you have a skills gap, it becomes very challenging for people to really understand what their role is and how it is that they need to perform. One of the things that we started doing is to try and correct that notion very quickly. We have some very critical agencies that we work with very closely. We're working to make sure that they understand that, one, they're passenger facing, and they also need to be the voice and the face of aviation in Nigeria. We've also launched a culture accreditation program within FAAN, and we try with all of the directors here to make sure that we're, clearly leading by example. But there are also incentives that we put in place. And I've said this to, I believe, that all of the airport managers who have just come on board recently to make sure that they understand their roles as leaders. They're now starting to take the airports almost like their own environments where they're sort of running an organization on their own. So I see my airport managers as the CEO of the airports that they run. Obviously, yes, within reason, but they're given the liberty to make very critical decisions.
Right.
Where necessary, they revert back to us within the headquarters.
Right.
But I think having ownership, accountability, as well as transparency within the organization are things that we can leverage to sort of bring FAAN to bear.
All right.
Yes,
So
I do agree. Please go ahead.
You can land on that quickly. I just want to say OAT. So you said, I heard accountability, transparency. What's the first one, the first O?
I said organization, accountability, transparency,
so
or ownership.
Basically, OATs. I wanted to put an acronym to that. But let me just add this question quickly because of time. A lot of Nigerians watching, they love what they hear from you, and the prospects look good. So is there a time frame as to when we'll start having our airports look the way we want them to look? And I'm not going to go deeper into that. I think all of us understand what I mean. So is there a time frame? Do you have a target that our airports smell that way, they feel that way, they look that way, the way we want it to be, essentially? And we'll speak to the airports becoming a dime and a dozen for state, but is there a time frame for you first?
There is indeed a time frame, and we've put an implementation roadmap together where we sort of box it into short, medium, and long term. I think in the very immediate, over the next 6 months, what we're looking for is really just the basic infrastructure. To your point, let's clean up the place, and we've started doing that. So if you go into MMIA, looking at the lighting system, the environment, the immediate environment as well. But in the medium term is really where we start to focus on larger infrastructure upgrades, expansion of the terminals. Some of that is going on right now. So we're looking at expansion of the terminals, but at least we're looking over the next 2 to 3 years, larger systemic, I would say. So if you look at airports like Lagos, Abuja, as well as Port Harcourt, we have started some minor rehabilitation works, but we're working very closely because there are some mistakes that have also been made in the past that we're looking to correct. So we're working with a consortium of consultants as well as engineers to make sure that we can actually correct some of those. I do want to put in mind that, look, in as much as we're going to ease the experience of the average travelers, we also need to stagger some of the initiatives that are coming on board, especially where there are dependencies on whether it's external imports or things that we cannot manage locally. But what I can assure you is that over the next 6 months, as we get into the holiday periods, there will be dramatic improvements from a cooling perspective, what the terminals look like. Of course, I know that there's a continuous comment as well around the sanitary rooms that we see within our environments, just to give you a teaser.
All right. Let's speak to some of the challenges of the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria now, which would be this big concern about the proliferation of airports across states of the Federation, even though they're mostly unprofitable. How much of that is a concern under your watch as the Managing Director of FAAN? And what are the funding challenges that you're currently going through in order to be able to manage these airports?
So I started off by saying that we have 22 airports, which we own and manage. We also have about 6 or 7 airports that are either owned by state governments or private individuals or entity, which we also support with either aviation security or fire and rescue services. But to your point, yes, indeed, we have a number of states in the north as well as in the southwest that are coming up with new airports. I would say that based on the stats today, only 3 of the 22 airports are actually profitable and contribute largely to the sustenance of the airport companies that we run. I would also say that we're actually cross-subsidizing the other 19 airports today, and in most instances, we will substitute or cross-subsidize for some of the airports that are coming on board as well. Especially if you look at the current system where we're contributing 50% of the revenue that we earn back into the federal coffers. This is indeed a major challenge for us. We are engaging with the various arms of government in terms of what we can do to sort of provide us with some relief. But what I would say is that, look, you don't drive passenger traffic through building new airports. Rather, what you do or what drives passenger traffic is actually the GDP growth or the economic activities. So my feedback or my comments as we have all of these new airports springing up is really to think at the bottom of the value chain, to say what are the key activities, whether it's through trade activities, manufacturing, or tourism-related activities that can actually drive traffic into those airports. From our end, at the Federal Airports Authority, we're engaging very closely with international organizations such as IATA and, of course, with the Federal Ministry of Aviation, largely around how we can drive additional routes, both from a domestic as well as an international perspective. We're also having conversations and putting initiatives in place to make Nigeria and certain airports within Nigeria become transit hubs. I know these conversations have been lingering, but the state of the infrastructure is also critical in terms of how we make these airport hubs. And what that means is that we start to build a network of airports where we can push out feeders to some of the other states or to some of the other locations and start to utilize our airports. I must say very critically, that if you look at the international traffic that we have today, we have, close to about 4 million passengers traveling internationally. The capacity of the international terminals that we have is way above that at the 5 international airports. So utilization becomes extremely critical. Because it also requires us to continue to maintain this infrastructure. And that also takes us into how we start to categorize and grade some of these airports. I'm sure you've heard me over the last couple of weeks either speak to my counterparts or start to engage some of the states and necessary agencies around the airport for exports initiatives. This is largely how we start to build feeder systems again, aggregation networks, bulk warehouse and logistics centers within our airport, again, starting to leverage the existing infrastructure that we have today so that Nigeria can sort of put itself back on the map as a trade facilitation hub, leveraging the airports. But I would say that, just a word of caution to make sure that it is a holistic view as some of these airports start to spring up.
So from where you stand, how do you weigh in on the justification by the subnationals that some of these airports that are being built in the States will be viable in the long term for cargo transport? And where that is not happening, what are your recommendations, particularly at the engagements that you have with the subnationals for the deployment of these airports that are not profitable at the moment for long-term profitability, perhaps not now, but in the near future?
So let me start by saying that there actually does exist a huge potential for cargo in Nigeria. Largely, we're an import nation, especially from an air cargo perspective. I believe that over the last few years, we processed about 280,000 tons of cargo. So indeed, there is still a potential. However, if you look at all of the airports that have sprung us today, as well as the airports that we have in place, it is important to ensure that we're actually siting what we deem to be cargo terminals, either close enough to markets where they're able to either aggregate or potentially consolidate the products that they are looking to push out. It's also important because I have seen some airports that have been designated as cargo, but really you think of how do you actually evacuate the products from either the centers or the areas that they're looking to move to the airports. Those conversations I would have is to make sure that, look, let's make sure that this is holistic in nature. There is some demand analysis that has been done, as well as some clarity around the countries that we're potentially looking either to export to or even the distribution across the states. But it is something to look at, and it is important that we also look at the supporting infrastructure and rather optimize the existing infrastructure that we have on ground rather than putting up structures which will also continue to gulp additional funding from us. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to build on that, maybe piggyback on what Bukola asked on what to do with this. I know it can be repurposed. You talked about cargo potential. But now that it is literally running at a loss, should we defund them or decommission them? What exactly can be done? Because I'll give you an example. 2018 or so, the NNPC was running at a loss of about almost 800 billion naira at some point. And funding was being brought in that direction. Nothing was going on, but we're losing money. And that has affected our fiscal performance at the end of the day, eventually. And I'm asking this because we're talking public funds here. What should be done immediately? Should we decommission? Should we repurpose? What exactly?
So I mentioned grading as well as recategorizing the airports, but I do believe that largely we need to start looking at leveraging the private sector a lot more. There have been conversations around concessions. I think I'll stay away from that a bit because it's quite topical. But I do say that private sector participation is indeed a way to drive this. There are various models that we can leverage, management contracts, concessions, as well as setting up special purpose vehicles. I do believe strongly that for the cargo entities or the cargo infrastructure that we have today, there's nothing that stops us from making that cargo infrastructure leverage into a JV with either entities who have the existing expertise and technical capabilities to help us drive this through. Setting up special purpose vehicles, partnering with them and potentially seeding the infrastructure that we have already is clarity and very clear direction in terms of how we take this forward. But I would say that as we start to look at them, yes, indeed, we can repurpose some of them. I was with the governor in Rivers State and also in Plateau State a couple of weeks ago, and those are the conversations, the direction that we're taking. How do we potentially put aggregation centers, testing centers within some of those airports, also making certain airports become feeders, as I mentioned earlier, for either the central. Again, we're actually ideally placed as a nation for further distribution as well as route development within the country today.
On a final note, on the side, maybe they could make some of those airports racetracks, just find something. But that's by the way. Finally, the movement, taxis, it's been a major concern, particularly if you go to Abuja Airport, even in Lagos Airport. You wonder what works. Is it the ride-hailing, platforms or a designated one by FAAN? And I know there's been a lot of back and forth, but I want to know if you've been able to resolve it, because that's one of the major things. If I'm traveling to your airport, I want to be sure that transportation is my least worry, because I've gone through a lot already getting on the plane and all of that. So has that been resolved? Do we have car rental services? Can I just rent a vehicle and drive it myself? What is going on with rental, as particularly transportation at large?
Okay, please let me try and separate that conversation. So rentals, I would say, are slightly different from the cab hailing services.
Yeah.
We do have organizations that provide car rental services. You will typically see stalls within the airport environments where you can do that. That's mostly at the international airports. I would say that for the domestic airports, we indeed have had an overflux, I would say, of cab hailing services. We've had the likes of Bolt and Uber, along with some of the locals and the domestic car hire services. We've had multiple engagements with them over the last couple of weeks, and we have started to streamline how they approach the customers, the number of cabs that they have available at the airports, and we're making that very clear. The other thing that we're doing very quickly in support of Mr. President's agenda and making sure that we focus on carbon emission is also ride-hailing platforms, so electric vehicles within the airport environment. But we're seeing that more as a complement to the existing car services that we have today. So there's a lot more structure that you're seeing where they're going to start using call-up systems as opposed to just grabbing individuals who are coming out of the terminals. The call-up systems and the cab-hailing services that you referred to will then become the way forward or the path forward to cab hailing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the program. Maybe in addition to your job, I know, as Kaida said, it's a very difficult job you're doing. Maybe advise some of these governors to stop building airports, or the ones that are planning to build? Because for some of them, it's a bragging right. These airports are not viable, according to you. And from the numbers we see, if 22 and just 3 are doing well, then we should stop building airports. That means it shouldn't be a priority. But we must thank you, Olubunmi Kuku, MD of FAAN. Thank you for coming on the program, ma'am.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we will take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to that guy that is, repurposing a few things to favor the agricultural sector. Join us again.